For more than 6 decades, Clint Eastwood has been one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood, a man whose name became synonymous with grit, silence, and power. From The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly to Unforgiven and Gran Torino, Eastwood's legacy stretches far beyond the silver screen. But behind the stoic cowboy image lies a deeply human story, one filled with love, estrangement, and an unexpected twist surrounding the enormous fortune he's leaving behind. At 95, Eastwood has done it all: actor, director, producer, composer, and even mayor. He built a career on defying Hollywood's rules, and along the way, he built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet, as his legendary life approaches its final act, reports suggest that his vast wealth has become a source of heartbreak within his family. The man who once stood tall as the symbol of independence now faces the emotional toll of seeing his loved ones divided by what he's leaving behind. Friends close to the Eastwood family describe growing tensions, questions of inheritance, and a quiet sadness that no amount of money can fix. This is not just a story about riches. It's a story about legacy, about a man who conquered Hollywood, built an empire from nothing, but now must face the one challenge he can't outshoot: the pain of family falling apart. Long before he became the face of rugged masculinity, Clint Eastwood was just a struggling kid from San Francisco trying to survive the Great Depression. Born in 1930, Clint's early life was far from glamorous. His father worked odd jobs, and the family moved frequently, chasing whatever work they could find. Those early years shaped Clint into the stoic, self-reliant man he would later become, a man who believed in hard work, resilience, and silence over sentiment. By the time he reached adulthood, Eastwood was tall, striking, and ambitious, but Hollywood wasn't exactly waiting for him. He worked as a gas station attendant, lifeguard, and even a lumberjack before fate intervened. A chance encounter at a Universal Studios pool led to a screen test, and from that moment, a new chapter began. His early acting years were filled with rejection and small, forgettable roles. But Clint didn't give up. He studied, watched, and learned the unspoken language of the camera. Then came his big break, the TV series Rawhide in the late 1950s. As Rowdy Yates, Eastwood became a household name, capturing America's imagination with his quiet strength and piercing gaze. But Clint was never satisfied with being just another television star. When Italian director Sergio Leone offered him the role of the man with no name in a low-budget western, few in Hollywood took notice. Yet a fistful of dollars changed everything. The film, along with For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, transformed Eastwood into a global icon. The Western anti-hero, laconic, dangerous, morally gray, became his signature. Unlike many actors of his generation, Clint was smart with his earnings. He refused to be at the mercy of studios. Instead, he founded his own production company, Malpaso Productions, which allowed him to control both creative and financial aspects of his films. That decision, rare at the time, made him one of the wealthiest and most powerful figures in the industry. By the 1970s, Clint Eastwood had become more than a star. He was a brand. His directorial debut, Play Misty for Me, proved he wasn't just a gun-slinging cowboy, but a thoughtful storyteller. Over the next decades, he built a reputation for making intelligent, emotionally resonant films, from Unforgiven to $1 Million Baby, earning Oscars and respect from even his harshest critics. But success didn't come without sacrifice. While Clint's career soared, his personal life was turbulent. Marriages ended, relationships faded, and his growing family expanded in ways even he couldn't control. Still, he kept his private affairs mostly out of the spotlight, choosing to focus on his work. By the 2000s, Clint Eastwood had become an institution, an actor, director, and producer who built an empire worth hundreds of millions. His properties stretched from Hollywood to his beloved Carmel, California, where he once served as mayor. He owned restaurants, real estate, and production rights that ensured his legacy would last for generations. Yet, behind the wealth and the fame, a quiet question lingered. Who would inherit the vast Eastwood fortune, and would it bring his family closer together or tear them apart? As the sun sets on his remarkable career, that question would soon reveal a much more complicated truth about the man behind the legend. For most of his life, Clint Eastwood seemed untouchable, a man too composed, too private, too focused on his work to let the chaos of family life reach the public eye. But behind that cool exterior was a complicated web of relationships, children, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. Eastwood's personal life reads like a Hollywood saga, a tale of charm, heartbreak, and quiet regret. He's been linked to some of the most beautiful and talented women of his era, yet commitment never came easy for him. His first marriage to Maggie Johnson in 1953 lasted 3 decades, though much of it was spent apart. During those years, Clint's career skyrocketed, and his personal life grew increasingly complex. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, as he became one of cinema's most bankable stars, Clint was also a man pulled between his growing fame and his yearning for personal freedom. He fathered multiple children from different relationships, a fact he kept private for much of his life. In total, he is believed to have 8 children, each from different stages of his life, with each carrying their own memories, and sometimes resentments, toward the man they called father. To the public, Clint Eastwood was the epitome of strength and control, but to his family he was often a distant figure, a man who loved deeply but struggled to express it. Friends close to him have described him as emotionally reserved, a trait that endeared him to audiences on screen, but left some of his children yearning for connection off-screen. Despite these tensions, Clint always provided for his family financially. He was generous, ensuring his children had the best education, opportunities, and comfort. Yet, as his wealth grew, surpassing $400 million by most estimates, so did the unspoken rivalry among those closest to him. As Clint aged, whispers began to circulate about the future of his estate. Who would inherit his vast fortune, the homes, the production company, the royalties from decades of films? Insiders claimed that discussions about inheritance stirred quiet unease among his children. Some reportedly worried about favoritism, while others feared being left out altogether. It wasn't greed alone that caused this tension. It was emotion. For many of his children, the inheritance symbolized something far greater than money: validation. Recognition from a father who, despite his fame and achievements, had always seemed just out of reach emotionally. In interviews, Clint rarely spoke about these matters. True to his nature, he believed that private life should remain private. But those who know the Eastwood family say that in recent years, as the actor grew older, efforts were made to mend those old wounds. Clint was said to have become more reflective, reaching out to his children and grandchildren, trying to create the peace that had eluded him for so long. Still, even as reconciliation began, the question of his legacy loomed. The empire he built, films, real estate, art, and music royalties, would one day pass on. But would it heal his family or divide them even further? As Clint Eastwood's story entered its twilight years, the man who had faced outlaws, killers, and injustice on screen was now confronting his most personal challenge: ensuring that his final act would bring his family together rather than tear them apart. As the years passed, Clint Eastwood quietly stepped away from the relentless pace of Hollywood. The long nights on set, the heavy lights, and the endless demands of directing and producing began to fade into memory. In their place came long walks along the beaches of Carmel, peaceful mornings on his ranch, and the hum of a man finally at ease with himself, or at least trying to be. For someone who built his legacy on stoicism, Clint was never one to dwell on the past publicly. But those who knew him best say that in private he had become deeply reflective. Friends describe him as a man who, in his later years, often spoke about what lasts: not fame, not box office numbers, but the simple things: family, decency, and peace. Even into his 90s, Clint remained remarkably active. He continued directing films like Cry Macho and Richard Jewell, showing the world that passion, not age, defined him. But between projects there was an undeniable shift. He began to slow down, taking time to visit his children more often, reaching out to those he had once grown distant from. He was a man who had lived many lives, a Hollywood legend, a cultural icon, and a father who, by his own admission, had made mistakes. In quiet moments, Clint reportedly spoke about regrets, not for the roles he turned down or the awards he didn't win, but for the relationships he had lost along the way. As his health became more fragile, attention inevitably turned to his estate and what would become of his legacy. Insiders say Clint worked meticulously to ensure his affairs were in order. He wasn't the type to leave chaos behind. With decades of business experience and a practical mind, Eastwood personally oversaw the future of his film library, his production company, and his real estate holdings. Sources close to the family revealed that Clint wanted to ensure fairness among his children, but also wanted each of them to stand on their own. He didn't want anyone to be dependent, one longtime friend shared. He believed in earning your keep. That was Clint's way, but even with everything carefully planned, emotions ran high.
The very thought of a world without him left his family shaken.
For them, it wasn't just about inheritance. It was about losing the man who had always seemed immortal. A father, a mentor, a presence so strong that it was hard to imagine life continuing without his quiet guidance. In recent years, Clint's rare public appearances have shown a man still sharp, still dignified, but with the unmistakable air of finality. His eyes, those same eyes that once narrowed at outlaws in dusty saloons, now carry a softness that comes with time, wisdom, and acceptance. To his fans, Clint Eastwood is a legend, the last of the true Hollywood icons. To his family, he is the patriarch whose looming absence is already felt. The wealth he's leaving behind is enormous, but it's the emotional void that weighs heavier. As one family friend put it, Clint never feared death. What he feared was not being understood by his family, by the people he loved. And so, as the final act of his life unfolds, Eastwood's story becomes less about what he built and more about what he hopes to leave behind. Not just fortune, but forgiveness. As Clint Eastwood's story reaches its final chapter, the man who once stood as a symbol of unbreakable strength now inspires emotion for a different reason. His life, built on independence and quiet resolve, has become a mirror reflecting the cost of greatness and the fragility of family. In the stillness of his Carmel home, Clint spends his days surrounded by the ocean breeze and the faint hum of memories. Every award, every film reel, every photograph tells the story of a man who lived without compromise. But beyond the trophies and accolades, what remains most precious to him are the people, his children, his grandchildren, and the loved ones who shaped his journey. When the details of his estate planning began to surface, those closest to him couldn't hold back their tears, not because of greed or surprise, but because of the message Clint embedded within his final wishes. According to sources close to the family, Eastwood made deliberate choices that reflected the lessons of his life: humility, hard work, and forgiveness. He didn't leave behind his fortune simply as money. He left it as meaning. Each of his children reportedly received something deeply personal, not just financial security, but mementos of shared memories. A handwritten note, a vintage photo, or even an item from one of his films. Tokens that carried emotional weight far beyond their monetary value. These gestures spoke louder than any fortune could. For a man who spent much of his life guarded and distant, this final act of tenderness left his family in tears. It was Clint's way of saying everything he had never said aloud: his love, his regrets, and his gratitude. But as with any great story, there were mixed emotions. Some family members struggled to reconcile the legend with the father they knew. Others simply felt the ache of time, the realization that the man who had defined strength for generations was finally nearing the end of his own long ride. To the public, Clint Eastwood's legacy is one of cinematic brilliance. He changed the face of American film, challenging the myth of the flawless hero and replacing it with something far more human, flawed, quiet, but profoundly real. To his family, though, his legacy is personal. It is a reminder that even the toughest man in Hollywood carried a heart full of love and regret beneath the cowboy hat and camera lights. In his later interviews, Clint often spoke about simplicity, living with purpose, valuing time, and leaving behind something that matters. "When it's all said and done," he once remarked, "you don't take the awards or the money. You take the memories," and that's exactly what his family will carry forward. Not just the fortune, but the memories, the laughter around the dinner table, the advice he offered in few but powerful words, and the pride he took in seeing them find their own paths. When the news finally spreads that Clint Eastwood has ridden into the sunset for the last time, Hollywood will mourn a legend. But behind the closed doors of his family home, there will be tears of a different kind, not for the loss of a celebrity, but for the man they loved, the father who, in his final act, gave them something far greater than fame or fortune. He gave them closure, because in the end, Clint Eastwood's greatest legacy isn't the wealth he earned or the empire he built. It's the love he finally learned to share.